After I turn my mic on, this hearing of the Foreign Relations Committee will come to order. Today, the committee will consider the nomination of 3 very experienced Foreign Service officers to be U.S. ambassadors to Uganda, Swaziland, and Mozambique. I was happy to meet each of you in my office earlier, and I appreciated learning the positions you have, the service that you've already provided elsewhere in the world, and specifically on the continent of Africa. In Uganda, our ambassador there will be tasked to help ensure that the country enforces a tenuous peace agreement, or helps to enforce a tenuous peace agreement in South Sudan. Another challenge will be to help Uganda avoid complacency with regard to HIV/AIDS after the good progress that the country has made, largely due to the PEPFAR program. Deborah Malac, a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, currently serves as U.S. Ambassador to Liberia. Previous assignments have included postings to Cameroon, Senegal, South Africa, and Ethiopia. Ambassador Malac.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I am deeply honored to appear before you today to be the nominee to be the next United States Ambassador to the Republic of Uganda. I thank President Obama and Secretary Kerry for the confidence and trust they have placed in me by sending my name to the Senate for consideration. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize my husband, Ron Olson, and our 3 children, Nicholas, Gregory, and Catherine, and our daughter-in-law, Shana. I am deeply grateful for their unstinting love and support. Without it, I would not be here today. Mr. Chairman, I have been extraordinarily privileged to serve as a member of the Foreign Service for more than 34 years. As the daughter of an immigrant who arrived in the United States in the middle of the last century in pursuit of freedom and opportunity, my service is small repayment for all that the United States has afforded me and my family. The majority of my career has been spent working in and on Africa, beginning with my first assignment in Cameroon in 1981. That first taste of Africa was followed by assignments in South Africa, Senegal, Ethiopia, and now Liberia, where I have had the great honor to serve as ambassador since 2012. Interspersed among the Africa assignments, I have worked in Washington and Southeast Asia on issues of democracy, development, trade, and security. Mr. Chairman, the United States has enjoyed a close bilateral partnership with Uganda for the past quarter century. Uganda and the United States have worked together to promote the peaceful resolution of a series of regional conflicts. Having expelled the Lord's Resistance Army from Ugandan territory, the Ugandan military has continued to lead regional efforts to counter the LRA in Central Africa. As the second largest troop contributor to the African Union mission in Somalia, Uganda has made tremendous sacrifices in its efforts to degrade and defeat terrorist Al-Shabaab and bring peace and stability to the Horn of Africa. The United States is supporting Uganda to build capacity in law enforcement, crisis response, counterterrorism investigations, criminal justice sector reform, border security, and countering violent extremism and terrorist finance. Uganda stands out not only for its contributions to regional peace and security, but also for its great strides in transitioning from a country beset by internal conflict to one that is at peace and growing economically. When President Museveni came to power in 1986 after decades of violent internal strife in Uganda, he instituted macroeconomic policies that contributed to steady economic growth. We look forward to continuing to work with Uganda to help expand economic activity for its citizens and support improved governance that will help foster broad-based economic development. We are working to help Uganda strengthen its multi-party democracy and reinforce respect for human rights. Uganda will hold elections in 2016, during which President Museveni will seek a 5th term. If confirmed, I will urge the President to ensure the political space necessary for a spirited and robust campaign in which all parties participate freely. It is important for the region and Uganda's future that the elections are free, fair, transparent, and peaceful. We continue to urge the Ugandan government to respect the fundamental human rights of all individuals. On the development front, we continue to invest in Uganda with a robust set of programs. USAID has provided over $430 million over the past 6 years in development assistance to help Uganda's people, efforts that support vital activities including education and economic growth, as well as reintegration and rehabilitation support for those affected by past conflicts in Uganda, including many former LRA abductees. President Obama's Feed the Future initiative focuses on improving productivity and incomes in the agriculture sector, on which 70% of Uganda's citizens rely for their livelihoods. In the health sector, the HIV/AIDS prevalence rate has fallen from a high of 13.4% in 1992 to around 7%, where it has stagnated for the past decade. Malaria still causes an estimated 70,000 to 100,000 deaths per year, and progress in improving maternal and child health is slow. Through the Global Health Security Agenda, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, the President's Malaria Initiative, and the Saving Mothers Giving Life Partnership, we are working with the Ugandan government to improve the quality and accessibility of health services and to address Uganda's most pressing needs. Mr. Chairman, if confirmed, I will seek to strengthen our partnership with Uganda as a force for regional peace and security. I will also work with the government and people of Uganda in pursuit of a healthier, more productive, and more prosperous society where protection of citizens' political and personal freedoms is a priority for all. Achieving these objectives will be critical to Uganda's future stability and economic growth, as well as its continued role as an important and constructive regional leader. Finally, Mr. Chairman, or more precisely, first, if confirmed, the protection of U.S. citizens and U.S. business interests in Uganda will be the foremost concern for my team and me. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. If confirmed, I look forward to working with you to represent and promote the interests of the American people in Uganda. I welcome any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Ms. Malac, with regard to Uganda, there has been, as we talked about before, an uptick in AIDS, or the HIV/AIDS. What is the government doing to help stem that? I'm talking about the Ugandan government, and then how can we play a positive role there?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, we are a bit concerned that the decline in HIV/AIDS rates has stagnated over the last several years. We continue to work through the PEPFAR program with the government of Uganda, with the Ministry of Health, which understands the concerns, but looking for other opportunities to improve prevention efforts. They have been quite successful in terms of preventing mother-to-child transmission, but clearly with numbers continuing to show increases in some parts of the population, there is more that needs to be done. We believe that it's possible to stop that from continuing to go up and push it back in the other direction. So PEPFAR is still very heavily engaged in a number of areas in the prevention arena.
Well, thank you. Uganda has played a positive role in the region in terms of contributing troops and helping broker peace deals and enforce, hopefully, ceasefire in South Sudan. Do you see it as an important role, your role as ambassador, if you're confirmed to forward that relationship? What can we do to make sure that that kind of positive cooperation continues?
Clearly, the relationship that we have had with Uganda over the last several years in the security arena is a very important one for our interests and the interests of the countries in East Africa and the Horn. If confirmed as ambassador, I will continue through the many different avenues that the U.S. has used to date to ensure that our interests and Uganda's converge as regards the security sector. We believe that Uganda has potential to continue to play a leadership role in the security sector and bringing some help to address the conflicts that surround that country. So I am quite confident that we will be able to continue that relationship. The Ugandans have said that they are committed to participate in all of the activities, but clearly we will need going forward to ensure that that conversation remains robust and that we are able to identify opportunities that they are in a position to address.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your willingness to take on this assignment after that nice leisurely post you had in Liberia for the past couple of years. Well, thanks for the work that you did there as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Ambassador Malac, last April, Human Rights Watch said that the new bill to regulate non-governmental groups would severely curb Ugandans' basic rights and would subject NGOs to such extensive governmental control and interference that it could negate the very essence of freedom of association and expression. Alarmingly, one of its clauses would prohibit activity, quote, contrary to the dignity of the people of Uganda. Such a broad definition leaves the conclusion that they want to just be able to act arbitrarily. So what is the State Department's view of the Uganda's new NGO bill that they're looking at, and what would you do as ambassador to help protect civil society groups?
Thank you, Senator. Regulation of NGOs is a topic of much interest and discussion among many countries in East Africa. And so we are understandably, having seen how it works elsewhere, concerned by the proposed legislation in Uganda. The good news on this issue, however, is that the Ugandan government has continued to appear open to dialogue and discussion and to entertain suggestions for revisions to the language of the legislation that are put forward by civil society organizations, non-governmental organizations, and international partners. If confirmed, I will continue to lead that kind of an effort to have a dialogue and discussion and try to moderate where we can aspects of the legislation, understanding that the government does have, the government of Uganda does need to have a good understanding of what activities are ongoing inside its borders.
Thank you. The Somali-based extremist group Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the 2010 bombings in the Ugandan capital, and reports say that it has successfully recruited members in Uganda. Also, Al-Shabaab militants based in Kenya have threatened Uganda with further attacks in retaliation for its involvement in the African Union mission in Somalia. We work closely with Uganda with assistance focused on improving border control and airport security, travel document control, forensics, and critical questions on Somali. Could you talk a little bit about that and how you see that situation unfolding?
Certainly, Senator, thank you. Uganda has faced a lot of challenges and is certainly under threat for the leading role that it has played in AMISOM since its inception in 2005. They have, as a result, been a direct target of terrorist attacks, and it is clear to us that there is much more work that we all need to do to strengthen their ability to insulate themselves to the extent that it's possible with terrorist groups from these kinds of activities. We have seen Al-Shabaab and what it is capable of doing, not just within Somalia, but outside. And it is an ongoing effort in cooperation with the government of Uganda to work together to try to build their capacity to do that in a variety of ways, as you've outlined. If confirmed, I would continue those programs and that cooperation in any way possible.
First, if I might, to Ambassador Malac, I just cannot thank you enough for your service in Liberia. In my 3 visits to Liberia, I was struck by the capabilities of the country, the challenges it faced, and in the most recent visit I had the opportunity to see your leadership in the midst of the Ebola crisis, and it was nothing short of spectacular. You were just the sort of foreign service leader we hope for in this country under extremely demanding circumstances. Highly motivated, capable, still retaining a sense of humor in the midst of one of the most difficult environments I've ever seen, and with a loyal and dedicated team. So I just want to start by, in front of your family, thanking you for what I know was a very long and difficult period and for your exceptional leadership in it. I mean to take nothing away from our other nominees, but I've had the opportunity to see you lead under extremely demanding circumstances. and you go from Monrovia to Kampala. When I first came into Kampala, I think it was in 1987, Museveni's troops had just taken control and he had just become president. And he is still president today. And so my first question would simply be, given what we've already heard in terms of concerns about the civil society, the NGO law, and the really grinding pressure on civil society, and given recent decisions about pursuing another term, how do you strike an appropriate balance between advocating for democracy, an open civil society and transparency, while retaining a positive relationship with a key regional security ally?
Thank you for those kind words, Senator, and for the question. Yes, moving from one difficult situation to another. Excuse me. The issue, creating democracy, creating multi-party democracy that functions in a appropriate manner is a process, as you know. It is not something that happens overnight. A few elections ago, there was not anything that even resembled multi-party democracy in Uganda. And now, in the election that we are headed towards in early next year, there is a greater semblance of that process. But it's messy, and it certainly is not as far and as well entrenched in Uganda as any of us would like to see it. So continuing to have the discussion, continuing to work as the U.S. government has been doing with developing the capacity of political parties to provide legitimate opposition to some real opposition to the current system, creating a capacity within civil society organizations, non-governmental organizations, to understand the role that they play, the important role that they play in making demands on their government for appropriate democratic outlets and processes, continuing to work with the Elections Commission to ensure that the capacity of the system to function despite some of the concerns. The issue of term limits is always a tricky one. Ultimately, this often resides in constitutions, and ultimately those decisions are for the people to decide. We understand often those referendums or decisions may not always be the most transparent processes. But that said, I think if confirmed, as ambassador, will continue to have this conversation that has been an ongoing one with President Museveni to show that, change is good sometimes. It brings different ideas, brings different opportunities, but most importantly, to encourage him to keep the space open so that opposition parties and civil society organizations, Ugandans, can advocate for their own rights and civil protections. Thank you.
Let me, if I might also ask you, Ambassador, about the LGBT community in Uganda and the shrinking space in which they've had to operate in the last couple of years, and the real challenges we face in trying to respect their security and privacy and liberty while still advocating for them. I had a very memorable meeting a number of years ago in which I was asked not to be a more vocal advocate because of the consequences for those who were known to have met with a senator or anyone else from our government. How do you fight for space when the political environment around it is not supportive?
Thank you. That's a very difficult balance to strike, particularly as we are pushed on the part of the U.S. government to ensure, as we do advocate all over the world, for the protection of the human rights of all individuals, to be free from discrimination, to be free from the threat of violence. It's an issue and a value that we hold very dear, and we must advocate in that arena, even in difficult environments like Uganda. It is often the case that we are sometimes further out ahead of some of the local groups or the individuals themselves. And so continuing the dialogue that we have, we work very closely with organizations and individuals in Uganda who are advocating for LGBT rights to ensure that we are calibrated appropriately, and to continue to work with the government, to dialogue with the government of Uganda to ensure that the space is open. It will be an ongoing process where we believe the legislation is that was on the books previously is gone. But of course, we will have to continue to watch vigilantly to ensure that we don't turn the clock back.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if I might, I'd like to ask just a question of all three, being conscious of my colleagues' time. Mr. Pittman, you served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Gabon many years ago. All three of you have had experience and exposure with the Peace Corps in the countries to which you will serve or where you've previously served. I'm particularly interested also in the Young African Leaders program. We had a terrific meeting with them in Monrovia, and the University of Delaware is one of 20 institutions that hosts them. I think it has a lot of potential and is an area this administration has led in. If you just please would in turn talk about how we build a better relationship between the nations to which you'll be posted, and what role exchange programs, service programs like Peace Corps, like Young African Leaders play in that process. Please, if you would, in order.
Thank you, Senator. Watching what has been happening with young African leaders who've returned, participants who've returned to Liberia, has been very instructive in terms of what the possibilities are, watching how they come back with these connections, not just to young people within the United States, but to the Africans that they have met from other countries that they might not have had the opportunity to do. So and they themselves, watching the energy, creating networks among themselves, talking back and forth and coming up with ideas about how they can contribute. So if confirmed, I look forward to the opportunity in Uganda to see what other possibilities we can find among the young people. It's a very young population, as many of the African countries are, and so finding ways to constructively engage the young population is absolutely critical for the future of this country. And I think that YALI, among others, is one tool that we can use.
I, too, wanted just to follow up on what Senator Coons had said about Museveni and just the comments that he had made in your opening statement. Uganda will hold elections in 2016, during which President Museveni will seek a fifth term. If confirmed, I will urge the President to ensure the political space necessary for a spirited and robust campaign in which all parties participate freely. Obviously, with the news on October 15th, the arrest of the opposition leaders, we're far from a spirited and robust campaign at this point. And so perhaps we can go further into what the U.S. positions will be. But I want to shift away from that because I don't think this has been brought up yet. Would just like to get an update perhaps on what you see in Uganda and what the United States is doing in terms of the LRA and resistance to the LRA.
Thank you, Senator. The counter-LRA activities continue. We have, as you know, there are now only one of the ICC indictees, Joseph Kony himself, remains on the battlefield. It's a slow process. It's a very remote area, but as you all are aware, the operation has been extended for another year. We continue to be hopeful that the activities working with the partners in the region, led primarily by the Ugandan forces, that they will be successful. That continues to be the hope, that we will find and remove Joseph Kony from the battlefield in the coming months. The commitment on the part of the Ugandan government remains strong to participate in these activities and to help free the populations of that part of Africa from the threat of LRA activity that has had such a negative impact for so long.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you.
And with the thanks of the committee, this hearing now stands adjourned.